So welcome this evening to Self-Exploration Coffee Chats, and I have a wonderful guest with me tonight who we're going to talk to, and that's Taylor Roark. I'm going to get him to introduce himself in one moment. Now, for anybody who's joining us on the Zoom tonight, you can either ask questions live or you can pop them into the chat window and we'll add them into the discussion as we go, or we can talk to you live. There's no one on at the moment, but there are people registered, so let's just see if they come. Doesn't matter. I've got plenty of questions lined up for you anyway, so we'll be fine to talk even without other people. So Taylor, thank you very much for joining me tonight, and I'm just going to get you to say hello and introduce yourself.
Hello. Hello, Marilyn. I am Taylor Roark, and it's great to be on Coffee Chat, although I will say at this hour of the evening, I've chosen for a mug of tea. You can, we were talking earlier that some people do actually put wine in their mug of tea, but there actually is a tea bag here. So it is real live hot tea and is nourishing me. And I'm looking forward to a self-exploration with a tea coffee chat.
I did think you were going to say you've just got that tea like label taped onto the side there, so it looks like you've got tea. You've still got wine in the cup.
I put my tea bag into my white wine. Oh, now it's really warm.
Delicious. I'm sure that's
yes, exactly. Ginger Riesling. Yeah.
Well, there's a possibility there of something new, perhaps as a new winter flavor.
Creativity is making connections that have not been made before. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So just tell us a little bit about what you do, Taylor.
What do I do? So I work as an intuitive coach. I help people with creative consciousness. I help people to create what they want in their lives. I like to ride around on a bicycle. I like to get my hands in the soil to connect to Mother Earth. I go for long walks. I pretend to write, but it's just more of a passing aspiration because I don't really put it to heart. What else do I do? I listen to music. I do some yoga. And I host a podcast, The Adventures of Self, which is about, interestingly, self-explorations. My podcast is about the adventure of self-expression. Probably other things I do, but that's enough for now.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that too. So that's wonderful. So thanks very much for that introduction. And certainly we met through superconscious training and coaching activities as well. And so have most of the other guests that I've had on here recently. So just before we jump on to the new podcast that you've got, because I know that's really exciting and a great podcast series to talk about, but we'll come on to that in a moment. So what sort of problems do your clients experience, and what are you helping with when you're working with them? Because I know on your profile, like that, for example, you talk about working with men, intuition and purpose.
So I do a few things. So I work with not just men. I mean, I do men's work because I think it's an incredibly useful and important aspect of where we are as a society today. I'm happy to talk about that separately. It's kind of more group work. But in terms of my individual clients, so I work with people. I mean, my clients have probably been from age 20 to 70 or so. And I've had people who are still in university and retired school teachers and kind of everything in between. And what I help people with is self-expression, started talking about it through the podcast, which is an extension of what I do, and what I help people with is to connect with their true purpose, to actually be able to see when you push aside the mist and the fog that clouds our vision through education or society or what we assume is possible for us, and to push that aside, to really hone in on, to focus in on what somebody actually wants to create for himself or herself. So I was just talking to a client today about her natural expression as an artist, and really helping her uncover what the truth is about what she wants to express as an artist, helping her push past her assumed limitations that she has developed over decades, about what she assumes is possible for her. And I mentor other people. I've got a client who is also interested in well, actually he is doing men's work, and working particularly with fathers, who are recognizing that maybe they weren't fathered in a way that helped them in their personal and spiritual development, and really wanting to offer that to the next generation. So he's a father and working with fathers to connect to the truth and the vulnerability of what it means to be a man. So that's some of the people I work with. I mean, I work with business owners. I've got one woman who is a very successful business owner, but who has been, uh, you know, heavily and negatively impacted by lockdown measures, and hasn't been able to open the business for quite a long time, and the struggles that go along with that. And one of the things we work with is that maybe a particular current circumstance that obviously you cannot get around, but that's not a limiting factor of what's possible for her. And so she's working as a consultant with a lot of businesses, and taking her natural expertise from running a successful business to help people as they transition out of lockdown here in the UK, whenever that is, into whatever's possible for the next 6 months, year, however long ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's certainly an interesting situation the last year, and you talk about possibilities. I know a lot in your work, and that's part of what we use, really, to get around situations. Is something that I write about in my stories as well, my posts, that part of being a person who is self-led gives you the freedom, really, to think about, when a blocker does come up, how can you find a way through? How do you find a way around this? And is that blocker something that's really going to stop me from getting to my goal? So, for example, businesses in the last year had to become very dynamic and flexible in how can we still continue to do our work. I mean, some, it wasn't probably as bad as others, but certainly everyone had to react on a really short time frame to do something different. And I think that's, some of the real valuable qualities around leadership, and being able to be not so fixed and rigid, and come back to intuition and creativity, and trying to figure out a way to get through. So, what sort of insights do you have around bringing people back to that, finding the possibilities, looking for more choices, and coming back to being more creative?
So the first thing that comes to me is that leadership is listening. Um, there's, a concept that we're sort of taught or socialized to, through media, if we've worked in a corporate environment where leadership is very much a sort of top-down, dictated thing. And there may be some efficiency, temporary efficiency in that, but most people find that eventually the ability to get to bring people with you on something is diminished if you're not listening to who they are and what they are. And it can be a scary place. I worked in corporate environments for nearly 20 years, and there is a culture that you always have to be better than excuse me, better than you were yesterday, and that, anything that doesn't work is a sign of weakness, and therefore a sign of your character, and your innate quality or ability. But if you actually look at true leaders, real leaders, they're not concerned with particularly how they look, whether something is perceived as a quote unquote failure or setback. Everything is going in, for true leaders, everything is in line with a particular end result, a particular vision. So the fact that you may go down one particular path and spend an hour or a day or a year doing something that is not exactly in line with your proposed purpose or vision is not a setback. It's not a reflection on your or one's ability and all that. It's amazing learning to know, okay, wow, I've done all this stuff, and that doesn't serve, or that's not in line. And so everything is a learning opportunity. I mean, I think that's leadership. Leadership is learning. Leadership is listening. Um, there are certainly people that are in leadership positions, whether it's of governments or organizations or families or society in general. And when somebody takes on the responsibility that they are then therefore responsible or to um, have to answer for every single action, it denies the innate talents uh, and abilities of everybody else around that person. It's unnatural, right? It's not. I do a lot of work around nature and natural systems. I said I like to get my hands in the soil. Like, I really pay attention to what's happening in the natural world, because we are part of the natural world.
Yep.
And if we connect to, and if we listen and observe how those systems work, every organism in the natural world is interdependent. So why wouldn't leadership be that as well?
Yeah, no, very valid point. And I love, the I mean, when you talked first of all about the top-down approach, like the first thing that comes to me is that's very much more of management than leadership, because
Mm,
leadership is really, for me, is about like demonstrating independence in a way,
mm,
because it's about free thought for me. It's about being able to be creative, and it's about not being in competition or worrying about what other people are doing. So not trying to be measuring yourself against others. And that's harder said than done sometimes, of course. But I know that there was some articles in the news last year around how feminine qualities in leadership, which are things like being dynamic, being flexible, being, like the feminine energy works in a more chaotic environment. So it's also the design energy, the creation, the imagination, and all of those elements have become seen as more valuable, which previously were seen as weak, as you say, like they're seen as not the elements that they want in leadership. Yet those are the elements that have supported the ability for people to be changing and being reactive in a world where some dynamic nature has been required, or some response. And exactly like you say, in nature, nature does respond as well. Nature creates a new way, it creates a new, mutation, for example, like for survival, doesn't it? So you're so right about getting back to aligning ourselves more with the natural systems and not going against things. And equally in human nature, to stop that fight that we have and competition against each other, be more synergistic and in our own sovereignty.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a value in competition as a concept, as a premise. But if that's the end goal in itself, it's detached, and it's sort of, you know, putting the cart before the horse. It's just it's an incomplete, and I think unfulfilling way to live, um, because it doesn't have balance.
Yeah.
You know, I was actually on a room in Clubhouse, in the last day, and there was talk about sort of masculine and feminine, and how loaded these terms are, right? And I actually have, in my work, with men, right? I look to, I suppose, balance out masculine and feminine energies. And I was actually thinking myself, maybe it's time for me to kind of move beyond these, right? Because they're so laden, they're so overworked, that because it's like once you say something, then everybody kind of jumps to a particular conclusion about it, whatever that conclusion is. But there may be a million different interpretations of the word by a million different people, but it's too, um, you know, it's they're too charged,
Mm.
right? And you know, in my work, I use spiritual alchemy, I use Taoism, I use nature as, as a guide, and the qualities that we assign to masculine and feminine. It may be, I'm starting to think maybe it's better to just start to talk about those qualities, right? So that we, and maybe we come up with Western, or, you know, Anglo-Saxon words for yin and yang, right? Or maybe we acknowledge those, as things that we can come to interpret, right? That the, you know, the yin is a receptive energy. The yin is a flowing, a fluid, you know, lunar, um, uh, negative, cold. There are all these things that in Eastern philosophy are accepted, um, because they are a perfect complement to yang, active, solar, directive, you know, whatever, positive. You know, and this kind of idea that's positive, negative almost gets, um, confused as well. But you know, if you look at an atom, right? I mean, we think like we're making something up, but if you look at the basis for everything, that every matter piece, of down to the, you know, atomic and subatomic level, is a balance of, you know, the protons and the electrons in every atom are balanced. That's, I
Mm.
mean, that's an accepted premise. I wouldn't say, I don't know if it's a fact, but it's certainly an accepted premise of science that's been around for over 100 years. And when that's out of balance, it creates different types of particles, right? That have a particular charge, that do something, that may be very, very short lived. They may do something, um, but that, and so it's not to say that everything always has to be this like equal balance and nothing ever happens, right? There is opportunity for imbalance, but we return to balance, right? Systems return to balance. I mean, that, you know, you can see that in molecules, and you know, going down the scientific route. Um, so I kind of lost my thought there, but I think that, oh, one thing I did want to say, just from what you were talking about, I think you're very right to point out the distinction between management and leadership. But because I confused them in I think the words that I offered, and it becomes very confused because management may be an administrative
Mm.
classification. I was very fortunate in my career to work. Well, I say fortunate. um, anyway, the circumstance of my career, I worked for a couple of organizations that were at the cutting edge and forefront of what was then offshore wind farm development. And we had no template because there was no template. We were making things up as we were doing it because nobody had done what we had done before. And in one particular iteration, we had one company had been sold, and a number of us formed a new company. And we were at the beginning of that company because there were a few of us that had worked together and were able to be free and open with how to organize ourselves and how to work through creativity, which I learned years and years before I, stepped into creative consciousness work with you.
Mm.
Um, we had a totally chaotic um, creative style, but it was incredibly fruitful. And at the same time, one person was the manager. And it was very well understood between us that that person didn't know anymore, didn't have any more, wasn't the leader, was not the dictator, was not the determinant, but that in terms of administrative line management and other administrative aspects, he was the manager. And those of us who were working around that, we self-organized in a way to allow and to encourage a lot of cross-pollination, a lot of freedom of thought and ideas, which meant that we were a small company. We had, I don't know, probably 10 people in London who were competing against companies with hundreds of employees and winning massive government concession and contracts worth, I don't know, it was 10 or 15 billion pounds, the concession that we won from the Crown Estate. And I attribute that to the way that we organized ourselves.
Mm.
So it was like everybody had their individual leadership in a particular area. I worked in commercial, legal, strategy, policy. There was somebody who worked in environmental, somebody who worked in, did all these different aspects, the technological aspect, and we combined all that for a group vision. It was synergy, which
Mm.
is one of the other things that I work with, is to help organizations, to help groups of people, really use that maxim of Aristotle, that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And it's a cliche now. We sort of forget, but it there's truth to it. Right? It's 2,000 years old or more, 2,500 years old. That concept, and it has value to it.
Yeah, yeah. And you make a really valuable point about self-organizing as well. I know like tonight's theme is centered around self-leadership, and self comes into it in many ways when you're talking about leadership. Well, it's kind of the center, really, isn't it? But so self-organizing is interesting because also when you're talking about a chaotic system, they can come out into an organized system by self-organizing. So even in nature, when atoms are in that place of being disorganized, and they can come to a state of being organized, and that's almost like the neutral state, or often it's a neutral state. It can depend on kind of what matter you're talking about. But yeah, so um, we as humans though don't really give that as much I guess, importance in the way that we see leadership. I mean, often, I mean, I guess I think I wanted to come down the road of like, is how much do people think management is leadership, and how much of where is the change happening in there? Are people starting to realize that actually true leadership, like you talked about earlier, is really the people that, like you said, they're listening to people, they're collaborative, they're actually helping create and work for a common goal kind of thing, and you can get that in management as well, certainly, because like you say, management is kind of more organizing and administrative things, but the value is actually in the self leadership, really, not necessarily in management. Like, management is kind of like more people can do that. So what sort of qualities do you think are kind of needed to be a self managed person, or operate in a self-managed way? Self-managed, self-leadership.
Humility, humor. Yeah, I mean, those are the two that come to me the strongest. There may be more as I come to it. What we, I think everybody has a particular heartfelt desire to do something, to create something. We can get into that separately, but assuming that there's something you want to create or lead in yourself, whether that's a project, a business, the idea that the idea that you know how to do that, and you've already planned it out on the human level, that there's an arrogance to me in that. And so I want to humility goes to listening to me. So I don't really know. I'm curious. I'm listening. I'm humble. I'm willing. Humility and human have the same root, and that who is a Sanskrit word that is goes to goes goes to the essence of what it means to be human, because we have an aspect that is able to learn. So if you go into something with learning, if you read accounts of the most influential and most accomplished people, whether they're world leaders or community leaders, whether they're engineers and inventors, whether they're artists and composers and writers, they they're interested in reinventing themselves and rediscovering themselves at every step of the way. And that's humility, right? That who I am here now today is not a reflection of what's possible. Going back to that thing, possible for what I can be tomorrow. And I think humor really helps because I certainly see. I used to try to cover up the mistakes I made because I was ashamed of them, and I didn't want other people to see that what I had done was a quote unquote mistake, or that I'd screwed up, or I'd taken a wrong turn, that um, I don't know what. And the more that I have not only accepted the quote unquote mistakes, but celebrated those, like to an extravagance, um, it it gives so much freedom to then be able to choose what is there. I'll give you just a fun little example that comes to mind. So, as you know, I recently, well, yeah, renovated this apartment that I live in, and it was a very long process. It took a lot of time, it took a lot of effort, it took a lot of money. But before even I got to the renovation process and starting it, I had lots of tension and anxiety and wasn't sure whether I would even start and how I would find the money and whether it would work and blah, 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 blah. And I had the, I don't know, willingness, humility maybe, to look at, what I wanted to do and what I wanted to create. And um, I I thought about what I was scared of, and I thought, oh, I'm scared that I'm gonna make this massive decision, this massive financial time, energy decision in my life, and it's going to fail. And then everybody in my life, all my friends, my family, is gonna, I don't know, hunt me down and post on social media, ah, ha ha ha, Taylor's a failure, see, he couldn't even do this, he's a grown man and he can't even renovate an apartment, or whatever it is, right? The fears that come up. And what I really looked at was that I thought I was going to make a bad decision that wasn't going to be financially beneficial, or whatever limited sense it was. And I looked back at my life and I realized that I've never made good financial decisions. That when I look back at this and this and this and this other decision going back 10, 20 years, I kind of always made bad financial decisions. And I thought, well, heck, the worst that happens is I'm just consistent with myself. So I might as well go for it.
Yeah.
Might as well see what happens. And maybe I just make a complete mess of it and screw the whole damn thing up. But hey, at least I'm being consistent.
I really love what you're talking about there, because it's interesting. Like, I was running a leadership training last night, and some of the things that came to me during that training were that I've looked back then at the times when I've stepped into my own leadership, and from and I take people through this journey of from childhood, where we are naturally stepping into leadership, or we automatically do it. And it's interesting to see how, as you get older, those self limitations become stronger, and you start to think that, oh well, I can't do that. And I find it actually quite freeing to look back and go, exactly like you were just talking about, going, okay, I've made these bad financial decisions before, so what does it really matter this time? Like, why am I getting so up about it right now?
Mm.
That's actually certainly a hugely freeing piece around being able to back yourself, which for me is a really big quality of self leadership as well, because there isn't anybody else that's going to back you.
Yeah, I mean, and I was just thinking, I'm not even sure I backed myself. I just thought, well, but I take your point. No, I mean, I know what you mean. That there is, I think that having the awareness of that, because there's two things that are going on,
Mm.
right? I mean, one of the things that happens in the work we do, which we haven't really touched on, is that there's a paradoxical nature to what we do. And on and I think by admitting that stuff, for me, having the humility and the humor to admit all those things, that, well, nothing's ever, not that nothing's ever worked out, but I haven't particularly made very good financial decisions in the past, and that could happen all over again. I think by admitting that, you allow that to be a possibility. It's not what I choose,
No.
but it's allowing it, right? It's like,
Mm.
it's to say, well, yeah, actually, if I look at the pattern,
Mm.
that's there.
Mm.
And when I actually fully admit not only the possibility, but maybe in some ways the probability of that, it frees me up to say, yeah, but I choose something else. Yeah, but there's something else um, that I want for myself. I don't know that will happen. There's absolutely no guarantee that will happen. There's no guarantee that, yeah, that will happen. Although what I find, again, paradoxically, is that by fully allowing the possibility of failure, humiliation, or whatever the thing I fear most, by fully allowing that, it almost never happens. And it
Mm,
makes the thing that I choose, that I would love, that much more probable by allowing the worst.
yeah.
And I know that's a paradox, but it's really useful to see that being in not choosing it, but just allowing that as a possibility, it's like you've extinguished that possibility in a way
Mm,
by giving it voice.
mm. Yeah, that's what I was going to say when you're talking about that. What came to me was that you've reduced the charge on it. It's not something that you're fueling. Like if you're ignoring it, they say resistance, what you resist persists, kind of thing. So if
Mm,
you're not acknowledging or recognizing some of those attributes that you maybe repeat as patterns and exhibit regularly, then you kind of slave to them. You
mm,
just keep, you don't allow them the possibility, like say, of existing, and by ignoring them you just like simply adding more fuel to them, and then end up recreating that pattern again
mm.
and wondering why. And so another thing that sort of come to me around self-leadership, and I do want to come onto your podcast in a moment, um, was leadership can feel a little bit lonely at times as well, self-leadership. And the reason I say that is because if you certainly in some of the work that I'm doing with people, like if they can't access training, for example, they might feel alone. They come up into a new situation that's occurred. You were talking about, going down one road and then finding out it's the wrong road, and then, sort of being able to backtrack and come back onto the path and try another opportunity or another road. Um, and that's really a place where, as a self leader, often you're probably, or as the leader, you're the one going down that road first. If you're leading people, for example, you're the one leading that charge, sort of thing. And and all of those fears are coming up in you to go, oh, is this the right thing, is this the wrong thing, even though you might be taking the next step and following through on that road. So what would you say when, if people are listening to this and we're talking about self-leadership, and they're feeling that it is lonely, they're on their own, they don't have anywhere to go, um, and how to stay strong to, being a self-leader?
Just ask for help. This concept that leaders are loners is the same. It's born from the same idea that a manager is at the top and can't show vulnerability or uncertainty to somebody who is below him or her in a say a corporate hierarchical structure or any hierarchical structure. Um, my own, I am on my path, but that's true whether I choose to acknowledge self leadership or not. That I know, having worked in the corporate world, from my own experience, and definitely from many other people who feel trapped in that it is an incredibly lonely place,
Mm,
and people ameliorate their circumstances through all sorts of things, either by making more money, acquiring more things, imbibing in more substances, whatever. And it's not to say that that's wrong, right? It's not for me to pass judgment on that, but I know from my own experience and from talking to people that there can be a lot of pain and
mm,
discomfort in that. When when I go through my own sense of leadership, there are absolutely times that I have no idea what I'm doing. Like most of the time, I have no idea what I'm doing.
mm,
And when I lean into that and admit and share, even though I'm choosing to lead myself or other people, when I admit that, as if by magic, we would say, um, what comes in to meet that is a world of support. We live in a world of abundance. We have been taught through a socioeconomic structure that the world is based on scarcity. If you look around, back to nature, if you look around, it doesn't take too long to realize that that is a false concept.
Mm-hmm.
And I particularly feel over the last, say, 2 to 3 months, I have stepped into a new role of leadership for myself in my community. And it feels very much like a big step up. And there have been times where I feel very lonely in that, and I feel unsupported in that. And when I have the humility to say to myself, to my community, to people that I may have nothing to do with, that I don't know what I'm doing here, the amount of support that I get in that is, I mean, deeply humbling. I've had that recently in terms of what I'm trying to do and create for myself and my community and my business. And the absolute, just out of nowhere, people come to support, people provide that. And it has taught me to do that as well. I grew up as an only child. I think I was pretty selfish and just, yeah, loner, kind of self-centered, independent minded. And it's one thing to have the ability to be independent, but we are interdependent as a species, in this universe. And so, as you know, although we may be leading ourselves and leading our lives, we have our own mentors. We have our own people that have come before us. We're all standing on the shoulders of giants, and so I can look to many people in my life who have been mentors and guides. Not that they are responsible for me, not that they are telling me what to do. And that may be family, that may be friends, that may be people who I've paid on a course or that I've just run into offhanded, and they have provided guidance to me. And when I reflect on that, it sparks in me the desire to pass that on. I just passed 50 a year ago. I was talking to a very good friend of mine about, stepping into that kind of elder role, which is like, oh, who am I to. But I recognize, I mentioned, like, I had a couple of clients who were in their young 20s, men who were in their young 20s, who were looking for guidance and support. And some of that I give free, some of it was maybe through a coaching relationship. So, we're all interconnected. So it can feel lonely, but it's only an assumption. It only feels lonely if you choose for it to be lonely. Because if you choose to be connected and to be open to what is there, it will fill the void faster than you can imagine.
Mm. Wow, that's very powerful. And I love that, actually. Yeah, it gives a different dimension to what I wrote about, because I didn't go deep enough on that when I wrote about it today now. Yeah, so that's brilliant. So let's talk about your podcast, which you've just recently launched in the last month, I think. And so tell us about, what you're creating there, what this is about, and really where it came from. Maybe, I mean, obviously creations come from your imagination, but
Yeah, I don't really know where it came from. I mean, it was something that was bubbling up for months, if probably a year or so. I remember thinking back at least a year ago that there was something I wanted to create that had to do with voice and expression. And I was terrified of it. to be honest. I didn't like the idea of it, and so I tried to hide it, and it kept coming back as something that was, knocking on my door internally, um, uh, and about this time last year, I to give you an idea about how long it takes me, I'm a bit slow. So I got the idea that I wanted to create a podcast. I didn't really know what that meant. I didn't know where to start. I was terrified. Um, and as I was working on my own business and brand and self, the concept emerged around the adventure of self-expression. So my brand, my business is around adventure. Not, we think of adventure as going off on a hike or, traveling around the world, and that is an adventure, or can be an adventure, to be sure, but it is not all that an adventure can be. We can go on internal adventures, emotional, psychological, all sorts of adventures, and that interests me for myself. It interests me for friends, for random people, and I started to connect with that more and more about what that meant, and um, and so throughout last year, I worked on the idea, got up the nerve to talk to particular friends, and ask them, would you please be willing to be a guest? I was petrified. The first conversation I interviewed was with a very good friend of mine, and felt like maybe I needed to pay this person or something. I was somebody I've been friends with for 5 years, and what I like is I like the adventure that goes along with what I call self-expression. So it's what we're talking about, self-leadership,
Mhm.
but what it means to be self-expressed, right? You, Marilyn, have your own flavor. The light of divinity shines through your prism in a particular array of colors, as it does with me, as it does with every individual on this planet. And I'm interested in every individual being self-expressed and in connection with their, or as that is connected to a greater whole. So there is, once again, a paradox in this, that to be self-expressed is to be connected to the universe, to be connected to the planet, humanity, life. Um, and the so it's an exploration for me, and it's also an opportunity. I believe that's the intention, is to entertain, engage, and inspire other people to go on their own journey and adventure of self-expression. So we've had, because I don't think there's anything that limits what that is. So we've had a very broad range of guests. I think we're up to episode 10. I think we're releasing episode 10 tomorrow or Friday. So I've had people that are in transformational comedy. I've had people who are working with natural building materials and creating amazing community projects around natural building, functional and restorative medicine by a GP and who's been practicing for 35 years, somebody who creates community projects around renewable energy and community gardening, and on and on. And we're one of the things that's been really interesting in terms of my own journey in that is most of the people that I spoke with in the beginning were friends of mine. And now I'm moving out into people I don't know. And there is a lot of fear and uncertainty that goes into that. And as I was saying earlier, they rise to support me. So the people that I speak with, I can go into it with an attitude that I am lesser, I don't know what I'm doing, or I need to accommodate in some way, or I can acknowledge that these people are there for their own reasons and to support their causes. The other thing that I'm interested in doing is because the guests I have, I believe, have a message, right? Because they're self-expressed. And so it's as much about promoting what they're doing, not as a sales thing, but as what's possible, and to talk about their journey through self-expression, which is as much about what you're creating or what you have created as the challenges and struggles that have accompanied that or did accompany that, and what you did to overcome that, how you bridge the two.
Yeah, so interesting because there's some of the questions that I haven't got to tonight, which is about lessons learned and adaptations and things in the work that you do, really, and maybe even like thinking about like how did COVID impact you, for example? Like, did you have how did you adjust, really? Because I think for me, actually, I've loved it. I've loved being locked in and being in a quieter space. So has that had an impact on you?
Sure. I got sick with COVID very early on. In Also about a year ago, in early March of 2020, I got sick, and in a way, I believe I got sick because I was not in a very good place. I was struggling in my life, in my business, and so I was susceptible to disease, as what I talked about in the episode on health in the modern body, with my friend who's been a GP for 35 years. She refers to it, and I do as well, as dis-ease. You're
Yeah.
out of ease.
Mm.
That's literally what the word means. And so I was out of ease. So I'm not surprised that I got sick. And I had a very difficult, sharp challenge for a better part of 2 weeks. And it stripped away a lot of assumptions about where I was and what I was supposed to be. And similar to you, since then, I have been on, yeah, kind of creative wildfire, because it stripped away a lot of the things that don't matter to me.
Mm.
And I don't mean to um, belittle anybody else's experience, because I know people who have struggled mightily,
Yeah.
physically, emotionally. But I do believe that, one of the things we've learned in our work, and I'm extremely grateful for it, is that external circumstances do not determine what's possible for us.
Yep.
There are external circumstances, so it means that I'm limited in where I can go, how I travel, what places I can visit, but it doesn't limit my emotional, physical, psychological state of being.
Yeah.
And it's helped me to it's demonstrated to me that those are self-determined, coming back to our idea of leadership. And there are many times that I've struggled through that. And it allows me to, it goes back to that humility and humor and ability to listen to what is in existence, what is actually happening, to give me choice in what I create.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there. Because I mean, as much as like I did have an experience myself as well of getting COVID early last year as well, and from my um, perspective, it was the same for me. It was stress and fear that drove me to that place. Um, and I've been able to overcome that. Like I've had the experience, and I'm like, okay, well, that was irrational where I was. Um, and certainly, like, it's really given me an opportunity as well around stepping aside from corporate and focusing more on working with people and, coaching and mentoring and training, which is what I really love to do. And so, the coffee chats also came up for me in part of the work that I do as an activity to do to reach out to people and provide services for, the people in my meetup group, which I started about 3 or 4 years ago. Um, and they will come, I'm sure. Like, I know we had one person pop in tonight, but he didn't stay for very long. Um, so we're about to close. We're coming up on an hour now already, and I'm just going to get you to give us some final thoughts of something you'd like to leave listeners with tonight, and also how they can contact you, because I'm going to put your details with this video on the platforms that we put it out, how you'd like them to reach out to you. And so thank you very much for coming along and joining me here talking about self-leadership tonight. So what are the final thoughts that you would like to give to the people watching?
Well, thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you for having me on. I really applaud you for what you're creating and the space that you're providing, both for your own growth and creativity and as a platform for others to share, like as I've done, but also to connect with others. I think you're creating, we're all creating networks and environments. And that's not, it goes kind of back to what we were saying earlier. That's not a competitive thing. It's the we were talking about Taoism earlier. So I guess this is what I kind of want to leave people with. In the West, I don't remember who I read this from or heard this from, but it's one of the things that stuck with me the most, and obviously I still keep it as a frame of mind because I'm using it now. In Western philosophy, when you look at logic, for instance, right, which has this very mathematical sort of deductive aspect to it. When you look at Western philosophy, and you can maybe extrapolate this to religion and other frames of thought, Western philosophy over certainly the last 400 years, and maybe going back far beyond that, says that something is A or not A. And we kind of say, oh yeah, that makes sense, right? And in Eastern philosophy, and Taoism in particular, and other philosophies, it is perfectly consistent to say that something is A and not A. So something can be possible and impossible. Something can be difficult and easy. Something and so in leadership, right, we can be self-led, and we can listen and be led by something outside of us.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Yeah, no, it's been wonderful to have you on here. So thanks for all your insights and sharing those with people tonight.
Thank you.